It's been 106 years since an explosion devastated the city of Halifax. And now some of the memories from that day are being heard on long-lost tapes. The CBC's Brett Ruskin has more on those revealing first-hand accounts.
Getting first-hand accounts of an event that took place more than a century ago is obviously difficult, but not necessarily in this case because of some specific circumstances. So there was a broadcast that happened on the 61st anniversary of the Halifax Explosion, which again took place on December 6th, 1917. Devastated the city of Halifax, nearly 2,000 people killed, with much of the city's north end completely flattened. Now, at that time, 1978, there was a young reporter at the time named Rick Howe. He would go on to become a veteran broadcaster with his own talk show, as well as just a well-known reporter across Atlantic Canada. So he hit record on his tape deck to capture these first-hand accounts of survivors of the Halifax explosion. Here's what he had to say about that broadcast back in 1978.
He opened up the phone lines and invited survivors, family members, others with stories to tell to call in and pass on their stories. And ended up with 3 hours of riveting historical context. People who were actually there, experiencing it as it happened and telling us what was going on.
And so with the tape deck rolling, those stories rolling in, obviously the first-hand accounts were of folks who were quite young at the time of the explosion, because this broadcast took place about 6 decades after the blast. So there was one account, for example, from a man who was 5 years old at the time, who called in and talked about how his first thought immediately went to World War I that had just happened when he heard and saw the effects of that blast. Here is part of that first-hand account.
And this terrible explosion took place, and I didn't get a scratch.
You're kidding?
I didn't get a scratch. It must have blew all over me. So I went down. I thought it was the Germans. I was only a kid.
Yeah.
And I, down where we lived, there were apple trees, and I remember my aunt walking through, her arm was hanging off, and she had my brother by the hand. And after that, the house was all broken up.
And so with the audio recorded of these survivors of the explosion, again, reporter Rick Howe eventually compiled them in a book that's been published this year, along with other major events of Atlantic Canadian history, a book that's now on sale, again, to really capture and share the first-hand accounts of the Halifax explosion that took place more than a century ago. Brett Ruskin, CBC News, Halifax.